Now, again, we are still under the body of the text, and after we talked about the introduction, number B is method, or sometimes they call it methods of experimental, or methods or material and experiment, or experimental methods. So either methods and materials, or experimental methods, or methods. Or some people call it, it's better to call it methodology at times. And this section really provides enough detail to the readers in order to follow the research and assess it and see if the methods are really justified or justifying the conclusions. Now here, of course, it is advisable, and you can see that it is advisable that the past tense is actually being used, because the past tense in this section will be able to explain what the student, not necessarily the student only, but the researcher, the scholar, have actually done, what they did. So they use the past tense. But of course, this section should not be written in the first person of I or my method, etc. Although this point may vary from one journal to another, but most of the journals that I have seen, they avoid saying the I and my. And ultimately, of course, this section is explaining, really, is what the issue is that's being studied, identifying or indicating the procedures that the scholar or the student is following, and also the structure. This section should be structured in such a way that it shows all this information organized in a logical way. However, if you as a researcher have got new methods, then you need to indicate that, and you need to explain them really well and in detail. But in the case of if you are following a method that's already been published, then you should cite the original research and include their own modifications or your own modification of what this. So your modification or amendments rather can be also mentioned, and you can say if the scholar or the researcher, the current one, has made any modifications to an already existing method. So it's either a new method that you're following as a researcher, as a scholar, as a student, which you need to explain really well in details, or a method that's been published before and you are modifying it, if you have modified it or not. You need to explain that well. So you need to explain in this method section, under the body of the text, you need to explain the equipments used, the tools of research that are used. You need to say your observation as a researcher, whether it's a male or female, of course, his or her research needs to be, the observations needs to be written and recorded, and also the data is recorded regularly. Of course, these measures needs to be very precise, and you can say here what is the strong points and the weak points of these measurements if need be. And of course, you need to explain also statistical tests that you are doing, because the results, the quantitative results, if there are any by the researcher, whether it's a his or her, can be assessed and judged. And then finally, you need to explain the criteria used for selecting participants. If you're selecting participants, whether they're human participants or animals or any other, in your research, whether it's a his or her research, that is, so the student should indicate or include particular information about the ethics, and should have an ethics statement, which is approved by a committee or permission being given to publish such information. So that is really very, very important about the approval, committee approval for any participants who are there, that you need to mention as an important element in your method.